Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Avery, and I am the Executive Director of Quanta Change. And I'm so glad that you are joining me today. So, in the past 22 years, in the past 22 years of guiding people through the Quanta Change process, there are a few things, a few concepts, phrases that I've run across that elicit one of two reactions from me, either rolling my eyes or getting a bit angry, sometimes both. And one of those things is this idea of you should just let things go. You should just let things go. Or, closely related is the concept of just forgiving, not for the sake of, say, letting somebody off the hook, but really so that you can have more peace. And so you may be hearing me say this and thinking, are you crazy? Like, Sarah, I have learned to let things go. I've really learned to forgive in that way, and it's been really helpful. I feel better. I feel more at peace when I do that. And it's just been really helpful. So if that's the case for you, then what I have to say today may not resonate for you very personally, but you might hear what I have to say, and it might help you understand people around you who aren't able to let things go or forgive in that way, why that is, and maybe bring you a bit more understanding about some folks who you know. So if you are someone who heard just let things go, and maybe you, like me, rolled your eyes, or you started to get a little irritated at that thought. So have you tried? Have you tried letting things go and it hasn't worked? Maybe you've tried some different techniques for it and it still hasn't worked. Does that sound right to you? So if so, I totally hear you. I really understand how frustrating it is not only to try something and have it not work, but see that there are people around you who are saying that it works for them and it doesn't work for you. And that's just so frustrating. So what I want you to know is that's not your fault that those things haven't worked for you. It's not just because you haven't tried hard enough or you haven't found the right technique. It's really because your survival mechanism doesn't allow you to bury learned distress. I am going to explain exactly what I mean by that in a second, but I'm wondering if there was a time where you could let things go and that kind of worked for you and then it stopped working, or has it always been this way for you? Have you never really been able to let things go? Does it feel like things just sit in there and gnaw at you regardless of what you do? So, that really speaks to, again, which of these survival mechanisms you have, and I will explain all of that. One more thing I will say is that this can be about almost anything. Very often we think of it in relation to people's behavior towards you, some kind of, say, hurtful behavior, harmful behavior towards you. But it can also be something internal. Say that you feel like you didn't do something perfectly enough. In fact, actually something like that happened to me this week. Maybe I'll use it as one of the examples today, because it's so different for me these days, my experience of that. Maybe you said or did something that upset someone else, or you're afraid that it upset someone else, and it's gnawing at you. You can't get away from it. Or maybe you didn't live up to some expectation, someone else's expectation of you, or your own expectation of yourself. You didn't win at something. You didn't do it in the manner that you really feel like you have to do in order to be okay. Or maybe you did something that feels embarrassing to you in front of someone or many people, maybe in public. So why is it that some people can seemingly let things go, and maybe you're feeling like, why can't I when they can? Well, again, it comes down to your survival mechanism for dealing with learned distress. So let me explain what I mean by that. So learned distress is the Quanta Change term for the feeling that you absorbed very early in life that there's something wrong with you being just the way that you are. And along with absorbing learned distress, your sense of self, which stores how you feel about being yourself, developed a survival mechanism that allowed you to fit well with the people around you back then, your parents and maybe siblings, other early caregivers. And that survival mechanism has continued to allow you to get up in the morning and move forward despite feeling that there's something wrong with you. And so the sense of self really stores how you feel about being yourself in its entirety. So it stores learned distress, your survival mechanism with it, and your core well-being. This is the feeling at your center that you are just great being yourself. So that's what the sense of self stores: learned distress, survival mechanism, and your core well-being. And one of the ways that I like to think about the sense of self is that it's a pressure cooker. So the sense of self itself is the container, is the pressure cooker. And what determines, you can have a couple of different kinds of lids on the pressure cooker depending on what your survival mechanism is. Some people have a nice tight lid with a nice tight seal that can allow them to really keep learned distress, that boiling mess inside the pressure cooker, contained. And one of the things that happens is that as we get older, from early in life, as we continue to get older, we are recharging every night when we go to sleep. We're recharging our sense of self with one of two things, but mostly with our learned distress, that feeling that there's something wrong with us, or the survival mechanism that says you can deal with that as long as you're this certain way, and as long as you do this certain thing. And so what we're doing is we're filling up the pressure cooker with more and more learned distress over time as we recharge with it at night. And time is turning up the heat underneath the pressure cooker. So it becomes more and more of a boiling mess over time. Now, if you have a nice tight sealed lid on, then what really your survival mechanism allows you to do is, if learned distress is triggered for a moment by something someone else does, or something that's gone on for you in your life, then it boils up for a second, but you're able to clamp that lid back down. And yes, what I'm saying is that if you're able to quote unquote let things go, what I'm saying you're actually doing is just sealing the lid back down. You're actually reburying learned distress. I know that might be a little bit troubling if you're a really tight-lidded person, if you're able to let things go. And I believe you that it feels completely like you've let things go and that's gone. I've heard from folks over the years that they thought they'd let things go, and at some point that stuff starts to bubble up on them. So that's a possibility. That might never happen for you, but that is a possibility. So that's what happens if you're a tight-lidded person. Now, what if you're a leaky-lidded person like me? If you're a leaky lid person, it's been spattering out all over the place for a long time. You're probably very familiar. You're nodding your head. You're like, oh yes, I am very familiar with this spattering of learned distress, Sarah. Yeah, I get it. So when you have a leaky lid, learned distress gets triggered. Maybe the spattering speeds up. Maybe it gets a little bit bigger, a bit messier. And what happens? Your lid is leaky. You try to clamp it down. You try to find a way to quote unquote let it go, but it's still spattering out, right? You can't actually clamp that lid back down, right? Now, there's a third kind of person in here, a third factor in that, and I sort of alluded to it already, that if you're a tight-lidded person, over time, your seal can get leaky. And that's if you're the kind of person who said, I used to be able to let things go, but now I can't. I don't know what happened. Something changed. It's that your seal got leaky, and now some of that learned distress is spattering out. Okay, yeah, that all sucks, right? Yeah. So what's the solution here? Well, unfortunately, you can't just go to Amazon and buy a new seal. I'm so sorry. There is no way that I know of to change what kind of lid you have, to repair the seal, in essence. The only real solution that I know to this is actually getting rid of the learned distress that's sitting in the pressure cooker. So it isn't there to keep spattering out, to turn the heat down. But mainly the way that we're doing that is getting rid of more and more learned distress to make sure that there isn't so much of it to be triggered anymore, to be spattering out. So Quanta Change, fortunately, was developed to do exactly that. So the way briefly that it does that is that Quanta Change works with your brain during sleep, because that's when your sense of self is getting recharged. It's also when a sort of wall of resistance to change that is protecting your sense of self is deactivated, so that you can really get into your sense of self. And you can tell your sense of self while you're sleeping that you want to recharge with that core natural well-being, that good feeling at your center. And as you do that, layers of learned distress are peeled off permanently. You're ladling learned distress out of the pressure cooker instead of continuing to fill it up. And as you do that, well-being, which is the air inside the pressure cooker, expands to take the place that that learned distress was sitting. And you feel better because you feel more and more of your well-being. Your well-being is there to be the foundation for more and more of your life. And there's less learned distress to get triggered by either other people or by your survival mechanism that says you always have to be more perfect, or you always have to get their approval, or you always have to do things in a certain way. There's less of that to get triggered. And the experience of that is that things that used to be really troubling, really huge triggers to you, just don't feel like such a big deal anymore. Maybe there's some person in your life who tends to be a trigger. Very often it's a family member, a parent maybe, who is just the biggest trigger in the world for you. And maybe it's not such a big deal anymore. Yeah, she said the same thing again. She said that same thing about my hair again. It's not such a big deal. I'm not boiling over about this today. That's the experience of unlearning a bunch of your learned distress. So let me give you some more specific examples of that. So one of them is from my own life this week. So just a couple of days ago, in some volunteer advocacy work that I do, our advocacy team that's been around for many years, we had our very first meeting directly with our senator. We usually meet with their staff, and we met directly with our senator on Zoom, and I was running the meeting. And our senator, in the course of this short meeting, 15 minutes, he asked for our feedback and our input on something. And I was so focused on all kinds of other things and taking notes and whatever, I just missed it. I heard him say it, and then I forgot. And at the end of the meeting, fortunately, one of my teammates jumped in at the last second and she answered his question. And I was so grateful to her for doing it. But let me tell you, if you're like me, you're already guessing what it was like. Do you know what it was like for me years ago? I would have beat myself up for days. I would have lost sleep for days. I would have been apologizing all over myself to everyone for it. I would have found other people to tell about it so that I could apologize to them for making this huge mistake. And instead of that, we had our little debrief session in my team after, and I immediately said thank you, of course, to the person who jumped in at the end. And I said, you know what? I think you were the perfect person to deliver that message. I'm so glad that you did. Thank you so much. And that's really how I felt about it. I wasn't covering up. I wasn't reframing it to make myself feel better. I really was grateful, and I thought, wow, I think that worked out the way it should have. And I wasn't beating myself up. I didn't lose sleep over it. That is radically different from how I would have handled that, how I would have felt about it years ago. So can you relate to that? Do you beat yourself up over some little perceived mistake that you've made and then you just can't, let it go? Yeah, I so used to be that way. And that just wasn't the case for me this week, for which I'm tremendously grateful. So that's one example. I hope that gives you some hope if you're like me and you tend to be really self-critical. that really can quiet down a lot. And you won't have to let it go, forgive yourself for it. It's just not going to be such a big deal. Or you might even find that something that happened actually was kind of a happy accident because it worked out the way it should. And you're just happy about that. So let me give you another example in the sort of other people triggering us realm. So I'm thinking of one particular client, but I could be speaking about any multitude of clients who have had a parent who was abusive, neglectful, emotionally abusive, coercive. So this client, her mom not only was all of that, but had very strict views about how my client should be to this day. And she's a full-grown adult with a family, and her mom still has extremely strict ideas about how she should be, about how she should live her life. And my client, when we started working together, she would get so angry about her mom. She said she was just boiling over about her mom so often, and especially at the thought of her mom like coming over, having a trip with her family or something like that. It was just off the charts angry. And she is saying these days that, when she thinks about her mom, even when she's thinking about like her mom's coming over, or her mom's asking something of her, she's like, well, yeah, that's how my mom is. And she said, I can't even believe it, because I'm not trying, I'm not convincing myself. It's just different. I just feel different. There's just less stuff triggered by my mom. And I can't believe it, because my whole life, decades, I've just been so angry about her. So if you have someone in your life who is just, you're thinking of them and you're thinking, yeah, but that person, I am never going to feel different in relation to that person, that really can change. I have seen it change so many times, even when someone has said, yeah, but that person, they're never going to change, and I'm never going to change how I feel about them. I have seen less and less trigger as someone unlearns learn distress that is tending to be triggered by that person. So if you're someone, I think most of us have somebody in our lives who tends to trigger our stuff, right? Who knows the buttons to push, is very good at pushing those buttons. If you have somebody like that, if that's familiar to you, there really is a lot of hope that I've seen that change all the time. I hear it every day. So I hope that you're feeling a bit hopeful. If any of this triggering stuff feels familiar to you, if you're somebody who has tried to let things go, tried to forgive, and just hasn't felt it working. And let me say something specific about forgiveness here, because it's such a concept that is ubiquitous and can have, I think, maybe some pressure to it from societally to forgive and forget, to forgive and move on. So, people say that the point of forgiveness is not to let somebody off the hook, but to feel more peace in yourself. And I think that's a great goal. It's just, if it hasn't worked for you, it's really frustrating, right? So, whether someone has apologized or not, whether that's been sincere or not, the thing that really keeps you tied to what someone else has done or said toward you is not what they've done, but it's your own learned distress that's triggered. So really getting rid of ladling out that learned distress is what allows you to actually move on. And that's been my experience, the experience of so many of my clients. So I hope that sounds helpful and hopeful to you. So if this sounds intriguing to you, if you're interested in learning more, the first thing you can do is find out which one of these 6 patterns of learned distress and control mechanisms or survival mechanisms that go along with them, which one of those you have. There are 6 of them. They are the idealist, the perfectionist, the optimist, the caregiver, the defeatist, and the dictator or benevolent dictator. Sometimes I call that one. And the reason to find out which of these patterns you have, which you can do for free on my website, is not to just dig more deeply into the problem. Maybe you've done lots of years, decades of work on yourself of some sort, and you're thinking, I know where it comes from, Sarah. I've examined my childhood. I've dug into all that stuff. I am so sick of digging into that stuff because it hasn't really changed anything. And I just can't do any more of that. Well, that's not what this is. So you want to find out which pattern of learned distress and survival mechanism you have, so you can see what you're going to be getting rid of, what you're going to be ladling layers of out of your pressure cooker, of the boiling mess of your pressure cooker, learned distress. So the way that you do that is you go to my website and you're going to take a free, in-depth, scientifically validated personality test that measures learned distress and its survival mechanisms. I will graph your answers and send you a free report that shows you those things and also helps you see some of the ways in which Quanta Change can help you start ladling that stuff out, getting rid of layers of that stuff permanently so you can feel better, so your life can work better and more easily, so there's less of that muck to be triggered by other people or by your own survival mechanism. So I hope this feels helpful to you, that you have a bit more understanding of where this stuff comes from and why it's been so hard to deal with. And I hope that you will join me again next week when I will detail some other way in which Quanta Change really can help you feel good being you. Thank you.